If you've never read Faust, it is a tragic play about an old man named Dr. Faust who has spent his life studying all there is to know and searching meaning in every possible way, yet at the end of his life he still feels unfulfilled. And in this frustration, he ends up striking a deal with the devil, who promises him to experience all that life has to offer in exchange for his soul. This story is where the term a Faustian bargain comes from. I've pulled up a simple definition of the term. A Faustian bargain is a pact where someone sacrifices something of great moral or spiritual value, like their values or soul, in exchange for worldly benefits such as knowledge, power, or riches. And this is exactly what Faust does. But what makes Goethe's Faust so interesting is that unlike the original or Marlowe's Faust, who only chased desire, Goethe's Faust is a lot more nuanced. Instead of just questioning what we are willing to give in order to fulfill our desires, Goethe's Faust ends up questioning the nature of human desire itself. In the other versions of the Faust legend, Faust gives up his soul in exchange for 24 years of pleasure. However, Goethe's Faust, when he first meets the devil, makes a very strange series of requests. When they first meet, he says, "Poor sorry devil, what could you deliver? Was human mind and lofty aspiration ever comprehended by the likes of you? Do you have food that does not satisfy? Do you have red gold that will run through the hand like quicksilver and away?" He begins to list many such desires that have no lasting quality to them, but that escape again as soon as you feel you've reached them. And in doing this, Faust is calling out this fleeting nature of desire and basically saying that the devil has nothing real he can offer him, because desire can never really be fulfilled, not once and for all. Faust then says, "Show me the fruit that rots right on the tree, and trees that every day leaf out anew." Mephisto takes him up on this challenge, but also adds, "But still the time will come around, good friend, when we shall want to relish things in peace." And by this he means that even if you think you want to constantly chase desire, and you want to experience that again and again, there will come a time where you will be satisfied, and you will want to enjoy what you have. To which Faust responds, "If I ever lie down upon a bed of ease, then let that be my final end. If you can cozen me with lies into a self-complacency, let that be the last day for me." And with this, he says that if I ever become complacent and all of my desires are fulfilled, then you can take my soul. And the reason he says this is what makes it so interesting, because Faust does not want a life of pleasure and ease and desire. It's the opposite. What he wants above all is to pursue desire. He seeks to never be satisfied, to feel the thrill of pursuing desires that are constantly rekindled, like the tree that leaves out every day anew. This is what he wants because he feels that every desire that he has been able to attain in his life has in that moment lost all pleasure and meaning to him, and still he feels this sense of longing for something more, for a greater meaning to life. And this is exactly what he hopes the devil can give him. Now, this very idea came from a philosophical dispute in the 19th century over the nature of happiness. At the time, Schopenhauer held the belief that in the circumstances of our world and our nature, happiness is something that is impossible, and this became the popular view at the time. This is what we know today as pessimism. And the reason for this is due to those lofty aspirations of the human mind that Faust describes as well. It is because we will always desire more things than we have that we can never be satisfied, and therefore we can never be happy. This view of pessimism was growing in acceptance and popularity when Nietzsche, who was originally a fan of Schopenhauer's, ended up becoming one of his biggest critics. It was Nietzsche who developed what he called a philosophical remedy to Schopenhauer's pessimistic belief. In his work, Nietzsche was heavily inspired by Goethe's Faust and claimed to have found in it the very answer to the nature of human desire and whether or not it can be attained. So I'll start by explaining Schopenhauer's point of view. He argues that happiness is an impossibility and writes, "Everything in life proclaims that earthly happiness is destined to be frustrated or recognized as an illusion. The grounds for this lie deep in the very nature of things. We call the will's hindrance through an obstacle placed between it and its temporary goal suffering. Its attainment of the goal, on the other hand, we call satisfaction, well-being, and happiness. He describes happiness to be only the state of attainment of desire, and therefore any resistance to that becomes suffering. But this is ultimately a very hedonistic view, because true happiness then requires a permanent absence of pain and a lasting satisfaction of all desire, which means that desire itself is pain and a source of suffering. It makes us perceive life as missing or lacking something. It puts us in a state of dissatisfaction. And because it's impossible to satisfy all desires, and that when we reach one desire, we often have another, this is why Schopenhauer claims that happiness is an impossibility. It's like Faust said in the beginning, with red gold that runs through your fingers. The satisfaction of desire is something that can never be permanent. This is why Schopenhauer describes human life as a pendulum that constantly swings between pain and boredom, and that there's no such thing as permanent satisfaction or joy. But this opens another very interesting question, which is, why does our nature struggle with boredom? And what does our susceptibility to boredom reveal about us? So Schopenhauer explains that we experience boredom when our desires for determinate objects are fulfilled. And with determinate objects, I mean anything that you can name, anything that you would think of as a goal. The second condition to boredom is that no new desires appear to pain us. What this means is we get bored if we've already achieved what we desire and there's nothing else that seems to drive us. However, often when we're bored, we feel that there is something that is still lacking or something to be desired, and this is why Schopenhauer describes boredom as empty longing. He notices that we continue to feel this sense of longing and desire even after we've attained the thing that we want. And could this be because possession of our desire makes it lose its charm? This is what Faust seems to think, as he described in the beginning to Mephisto. So, Schopenhauer's theory suggests that we not only have desires for determinate objects, but we also have a second type of desire that is to desire a determinate object. And this second desire is frustrated by the attainment of those determinate objects. And this frustration that we feel when we attain our desires is what he calls boredom. Schopenhauer writes, "We are bored when we lack objects of willing." And by willing, he means objects that we can put our will upon, that we can desire. For example, a bored person will complain about having nothing to do, but it's not that he has no obligations or nothing that he should do whatsoever. It's that he has no inclination, no desire to do anything. He's stuck in this grip of empty longing and only wants to desire again. This is what Schopenhauer means with that pendulum that swings between pain and boredom, because we are in a state of pain when we have not attained our desires for determinate objects, because desire itself puts us in a state of dissatisfaction, and this is that pain that we experience. He calls this suffering. And on the other end, when we do attain our desires, we then feel empty. We feel an empty longing because a part of us wants to desire things. And this second desire becomes frustrated, and the way that shows up is boredom. So, from Schopenhauer's reflection, we now have two types of desires. The first order desires are desires for determinate objects. For example, I want a new car. That would be a first order desire. Now, next to this, we have second order desires, which are indeterminate desires. It is the desire to desire something. And this is exactly why any kind of final satisfaction of desire is impossible. And Schopenhauer claims that there's no such thing as happiness if happiness means a fixed final state of having all of your desires be fulfilled. Because you're always going between one or the other, and you cannot fulfill both types of desires at the same time. What's funny is that this forms what in German you would call a Teufelskreis, a devil's circle, where it leads you in a circle where as soon as you reach one thing, it means that you're missing the other. And there's no escape out of it, which is what makes the concept of the Faustian Bargain so interesting, because it is the question, can human desire ever truly be fulfilled? Is there such a thing as true happiness? The satisfaction of first-order desires for specific goals implies the frustration of our second-order desires, which is to have a desire. and vice versa. Hence, as Schopenhauer says, human life is a pendulum between pain from the frustration of first-order desires and boredom from the frustration of second-order desires. Now, it's at this point that Nietzsche comes in. He agrees with most of what Schopenhauer claims up until a certain point. He doesn't deny that we have second-order desires, but he claims that this isn't alone the reason for our boredom. He explains that when we are bored, we don't complain about having nothing to desire, we complain about having nothing to do. So the action is a very important part of this. Therefore, second-order desires isn't just to have desires, but it's to pursue our desires. We want to have desires because they give us something to do. And Nietzsche adds, which is very important, is that we can also get bored of pursuing a desire if it isn't challenging enough for us. I find a really great way to think about this, to think about Nietzsche's definition of second-order desires, is to actually think about the psychology that's behind games. When we play games, we are given a clear goal. This is the determinate desire. And in order to reach this, to pursue this goal, we face many obstacles that become more and more challenging. And every time we overcome one obstacle, we become a bit stronger, a bit more capable in the game. And then already we must try to overcome the next challenge. And you're also rewarded with milestones throughout the game that allow you to feel that you are moving towards the greater goal. It makes you feel like you're moving forwards, and that in itself is the satisfaction of second-order desires. Now, the challenge is being able to make life the same. Now, this second-order desire, the desire for overcoming challenges in pursuit of a determinate desire, is what Nietzsche calls the will to power. And I'm very glad because now I can start saying the will to power instead of having to repeat all of that again. So 2 things I want to note on the will to power is that power is a very intangible concept, but it is defined as the overcoming of resistances. Power itself has no determinate objects. But the second thing is that power can only be satisfied when a person has a desire for something other than power. It needs a determinate desire. This is the nature of the will to power, or second-order desires. So, to put it simply, the will to power is our inner drive to achieve our goals. This is also where Nietzsche's concept of the will to power conflicts with Schopenhauer's idea of happiness. The will to power seeks resistance and dissatisfaction and displeasure, which is why it isn't a state where all resistances have been overcome, as Schopenhauer defined happiness. But it is a desire for the process of overcoming resistances. And this is huge because it views happiness as the process of overcoming challenges in pursuit of a goal. That is life. All we experience in life is one challenge after another, and we can never reach a state of final and complete satisfaction. We will always be longing for other desires, and instead of that being a curse or belief of pessimism, as Schopenhauer saw it, Nietzsche actually claims that this is the key to living a life of happiness. So Schopenhauer's definition of suffering as the resistance to desire is flipped on its head in the will to power, which actively seeks displeasure. This is exactly the type of desire we often lack in life, and we often do so unknowingly, and then we experience boredom and empty longing. I find a great way to think of this is how we can get so caught up in the idea that happiness is simply the attainment of our desires. It is a state free of pain and free of desire. But if that were the case, then it would be easier today than ever to find happiness. We see how people all the time look around and see others who seem to have more in life, and we think that they must be happier because of this. But the world we live in, it's a lot easier to have our basic needs fulfilled. It is easier to attain determinate desires, but this doesn't make us happy. It actually makes life less challenging and therefore more frustrating for us. And it's because nobody tells us that happiness is the desire for resistance and overcoming it. So many people feel empty and bored, and they long for something they don't know what, just like Faust. Therefore, Nietzsche suggests that we need to change the way we understand happiness. I want to read another quote from Nietzsche that I find explains this really well. He writes, "Human beings do not seek pleasure and avoid displeasure. What human beings want, what every smallest organism wants, is an increase of power. Driven by that, they will seek resistance. They need something that opposes it. Displeasure as an obstacle to their will to power is therefore a normal fact. Human beings do not avoid it. They are rather in continual need of it." This actually reminds me a lot of Jung as well, who claims that the only death to the psyche is that of stagnation. All challenge, all discomfort and resistance is actually a very good thing, because that is what fuels us to grow. That is what makes us stronger or more powerful. So the will to power is then about the attainment of power through the pursuit of a determinate object. And to realize this will to power means seeking displeasure and resistance, which is pretty much the opposite of what Schopenhauer claims, because Nietzsche suggests that the only way we can achieve happiness is through suffering. They're not opposites of each other, they're one and the same, they're two sides of the same coin. As Nietzsche puts it, the will to power is about having an end and an opposite to ends. And this is exactly what creates a paradox. The satisfaction of the will to power implies dissatisfaction. So, willing power implies willing to have desires and resistances to them. This means the will to power is satisfied when our determinate desires are dissatisfied, and vice versa. This is that pendulum. But it's important to remember that the will to power isn't just the desire to desire, which would include determinate desires and resistances, but it is also the desire to overcome challenges. So, to sum up, the conditions for the will to power are a desire for a determinate object, resistances in pursuing this desire, and success in overcoming these resistances. Now, to give you an example of what this actually looks like, one of my big goals in life is to be a successful author. This would be the first condition, having a desire for a determinate object. This is a determinate object because it is something that I can name, I can write down as a goal. Now, the second condition is having resistances in pursuing this desire, which means you basically ask yourself, is this a challenging goal for me? I can think of this and go, okay, yes, there are many resistances, such as writing a book, making sure it's a good book, getting an agent, getting a publisher, making sure it actually does well. There are many of these types of levels of resistance, and they also increase in stakes, which is a good thing. Now, the third condition is success in overcoming these challenges. And this is why I said it's a good thing to have many levels of resistance, because it is the process, the journey, remember? So by moving towards overcoming each of these resistances and to be making progress to have success in doing so, you are doing something that fulfills all of these conditions for the will to power. This is basically the remedy to boredom and empty longing. Like I said, there are two types of desires. There are first and second order desires, and this is why this becomes a paradox. Now, a great example to show this paradox is to actually think of a game. We can only genuinely be fulfilled in playing a game if we have a genuine desire to win it. But this is a paradox because we have both a desire to play the game and the determinate desire to win the game. But as soon as we achieve the determinate desire, it brings the game to an end. We play the game to win, but as soon as we achieve victory, we're frustrated because we're deprived of a game to play. Now, if you see what I mean with that in-between state is exactly what we crave. We constantly long to have both desires fulfilled, but because it's this Teufelskreis, there's no way to ever achieve that. And it is that feeling of satisfaction, of desire, a complete satisfaction of both of these desires that Faust seeks from Mephisto, but he believes it is impossible, and therefore he thinks he is entering a bargain that he can never lose. So what does this paradox mean for the will to power? The will to power constantly demands new challenges and new resistances to overcome. It is not fulfilled through a life of Sisyphus, which is just rolling the same boulder up the hill non-stop. Its nature is a lot more expansive. If you think of the will to power, when it comes to knowledge, then the whole point is to constantly desire to solve new problems, to attain new knowledge. It is to expand what one has, and because of this, it is always growing outwards. Once you've solved a problem, you're going to feel a lot less enjoyment out of it if you solve the same problem a second time, because that is when it becomes boredom. The challenge is no longer challenging enough that the will to power can be fulfilled. And because of this, the will to power takes the form of a continuous self-overcoming, which I believe today we might just call self-actualization, which is the process of realizing all of your potentials and possibilities. And this shows that the will to power is a desire that does not allow for any kind of permanent satisfaction. Instead, it is a continuous striving. This is what we see in Faust. And now remember what I was saying about how if we were to play a game and we start the game with already every achievement and every item that we can win through playing it, all of a sudden this has no enjoyment for us. It becomes boring. It has no value. Nietzsche explains this pretty well. He writes, "Praiseworthy is whatever seems difficult to a people. Whatever seems indispensable and difficult is called good, and whatever liberates, even out of the deepest need, the rarest, the most difficult, that they call holy." So this tells us that the difficulty of an achievement contributes to its value. We know this subconsciously. And now we can also understand Faust's strange request a lot better. It isn't about the fulfillment of happiness as this impossible permanent state of satisfaction, but it is the desire for a sort of self-actualization. So this whole dispute between Nietzsche and Schopenhauer on the nature of happiness, we can understand a lot better when we realize that this Faustian desire to desire is at the heart of it. Schopenhauer defines happiness as a permanent absence of pain, a final satisfaction to all desires. In other words, we are free from pain, we are free from longing, from suffering, and free from desire itself. It is a state of peace where all of your needs and desires are met. You are perfectly content and satisfied, which you can think of the Christian eternal afterlife in heaven, or even nirvana, to be free from pain and desire. This idea of happiness is a condition where there is nothing left to be desired. However, this second type of desire, the desire to desire, prevents exactly this fixed state of contentment. We will never be fully content because satisfaction isn't the only thing we desire. And in demanding satisfaction for this desire to desire, which is a paradox in itself, Faust is not only selling his soul to the devil, but in doing so, he is quite literally depriving himself of the eternal contentment of heaven. Just like Campbell says, all myth and stories is a metaphor for processes that we cannot see but that happen within the psyche, and you can think of the Faustian Bargain in the same way. The Faustian Bargain describes this paradox of happiness. It shows that there are two wills for desire within us, and that it is an impossibility to ever satisfy both. Nietzsche also writes, "What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that a resistance is overcome, not contentment but more power, not peace at all, but war." I find this is a very radical but very interesting take on what happiness actually means. First of all, this tells us that happiness isn't a state, but it is a process of overcoming resistance in pursuit of desire. And second, it doesn't exclude suffering, but it in fact views suffering as a requirement to experiencing happiness. In the Christian myth of the fall, Adam and Eve begin their lives in the Garden of Eden, a place where all of their needs and desires are fulfilled. It is a state of perfect satisfaction. But after their fall, they are told to work by the sweat of their brow. In other words, they must overcome resistances in order to pursue the fulfillment of their needs and desires. And Nietzsche claims to find the key to human happiness in this very punishment. And just like Faust, he views this paradox of happiness as striking a deal with the devil. It is the eternal pursuit of desire without any true possibility of its attainment. When Faust entered his pact with Mephisto, he made it an impossibility to ever go to heaven and attain this state of eternal satisfaction. But this is exactly what makes the story so real for us. His desire isn't one of eternal contentment, but it is one of self-actualization. What he desires above all is to realize his fullest potential. And that, as Nietzsche puts it, is the true nature of happiness. It is this will to power. It is the process of self-actualization, a constant cycle of becoming and overcoming. This is why Nietzsche says happiness is a Faustian bargain, because it is a desire that can never be fulfilled. It is a paradox in itself. But unlike Schopenhauer, Nietzsche wasn't pessimistic about it. This isn't a curse, this isn't a bad thing, or even a punishment like the myth of the fall might suggest. Instead, it shows us exactly what our nature is, and that is found in the will to power. This is what happiness means to us. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time. Bye!